Alright, so the path tracing update for Doom the Dark Ages launched earlier this week, and in today's video we're going to be testing the 5060 Ti, the 5070 and the 5070 Ti. But I just quickly want to show you here before we actually start with all our benchmarks. The game actually got a dedicated benchmark tool, a built-in benchmark tool as well. So what I'm going to be doing for this video is I'm going to be running the Siege benchmark pass, right? But let me just show you what that looks like so that you know more or less what to expect at the end. Now you can see in the left hand side, on the left hand side there, we have the frame rate, we have the CPU frame times, and then we have the GPU frame times, right? So yeah, you can see that the CPU is capable of preparing 300 frames per second, but the GPU is our bottleneck here, getting 80 frames per second. So that's basically what the whole benchmark tool looks like. You can cycle through a few things, whatever. I won't be able to fit this, the on-screen display in. I'll be using my own metrics with the MSI Afterburner. But I want to show you just at the end what the results look like. And also, I won't be showing you the full benchmark run because I think it's about a minute long, right? And I'll be doing quite a few runs, so I don't want to just show you the same thing over and over and over again. Alright, so at the end, this is what you are presented with. It gives you quite a lot of info, right? It shows you everything about your system here. You can see we've got the 5070 Ti in at the moment, the latest Nvidia driver. It's a 7800 X3D, and it says Windows 10 dot whatever, but it's Windows 11, the latest version of Windows 11, so whatever, that's just the version number. And then if you have a look at show details here, it actually shows you quite a bit of detail here. So your CPU frame times, your average frame time, and then your GPU frame times, right? And then under video settings, it shows you exactly what settings have been used. So it is actually pretty cool, right? Obviously I didn't want to test path tracing in this. I just wanted to show you the benchmark run. And then you can actually hit compare benchmarks, so you can select two benchmarks here and show details, and now it'll show you additional info. So both here were with the 5070 Ti, just the different settings. I was just playing around, right? But you can have multiple runs, do an overclock, do the same run, and you can have a decent comparison here, right? So I thought that was pretty cool. Now I will be using this tool for this benchmark video, so let's get right to it. Alright, so I spent more than 20 hours on this video. That includes recording, editing. We've got a bunch of settings here. So we're starting off at 1080p Ultra Nightmare DLAA native. On the left, we've got the 5070 Ti. In the middle, the 5070, and on the right, the 5060 Ti, 16 gig. And one thing that I want to point out here quickly is that the 5070 Ti seems to behave a little bit strangely in this game sometimes, and I figured out the reason. I'll explain it a little bit later, but you can see that sometimes the performance isn't as big over the 5070 than it usually is, and also the 5070 Ti sometimes uses less power than the 5070 but still performs around 15% better, right? That's just my model. It's the Palit GameRock OC model. It's hard locked at 995 millivolt, and there's nothing I can do to increase the power usage, right? It is just locked at 995 millivolt. Even if I update the BIOS to a 330 watt BIOS, it just does not increase the voltage limit. Now if we kick on path tracing here, none of the three GPUs here are able to give you an above 60 frames per second experience here. That's expected, right? It's path tracing. Path tracing is exceptionally heavy, and I know in the comments people are going to say not returning a $1,000 GPU into a 720p card. Just understand that path tracing is very, very heavy. But now you can see that the 5070 Ti's power draw increases quite a bit, although it's not that much higher than the 5070. My 5070 Ti uses around 240, 250 watt at max, right? And its power limit is 300 and something watt, and the 5070 is 250 watt, right? So if we kick on DLSS Quality here, both the 5070 and the 5070 Ti can get you quite decent frame rates here, but sure, you're not going to buy an $800 GPU like the 5070 Ti to play 1080p. Some people would. Like, I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to show you the performance numbers, right? And I initially wanted to include the 5080 in here as well, but I'm going to, after this benchmark run, I'm just going to explain to you exactly what happens here with the 5070 Ti and why the numbers are sometimes a little bit lower, or the difference between the 5070 Ti and the 5070 is sometimes a little bit lower than usually expected, right? And it's not because there's something wrong with it, well, per se, but let me quickly explain to you what I found out. So I asked on Twitter whether it would be possible for the PCIe Gen 5 to be faster than PCIe Gen 4, because all the results that I found online to compare my results to were with PCIe Gen 5, and I was a little bit behind, right? So I was a little bit concerned that, okay, is my GPU underperforming here, or is it due to PCIe Gen 4 versus Gen 5, because my system only supports PCIe Gen 4? And then Alexandre Zibert from Nvidia actually posted his results. So here we have the PCIe Gen 4 results, where he has 72 frames per second average, and then PCIe Gen 5, he's got 77 frames per second average. Don't mind the minimums. The minimums are completely inaccurate. He posted frame time graphs and power usage and all that kind of stuff as well, and none of the minimums here recorded by the in-game benchmark match any of the captured runs via CapFrameX. Anyway, so there's about a 7% difference here between PCIe Gen 4 and PCIe Gen 5. So I will be getting a Gen 5 board sometime soon to do my own testing, so stay tuned for that. If you want to see that, hit that subscribe button and enable notifications. I'll see when I can do it, hopefully at the end of the month. But until then, just add like 7% to the 5070 Ti performance here to get closer to the PCIe Gen 5 results. Now, I highly doubt that would affect the 5070 and the 5060 Ti performance here, because purely my 5070 results match up to what I could actually find online, other people's results. Just my 5070 Ti was slightly behind, but as I said, all the results that I could find were with PCIe Gen 5, so it makes sense that I'm about 5 to 7% behind the rest of the pack. Only sometimes though, right? When we get to 1440p and 4K, the results actually start to become a little bit more interesting. Sometimes the differences are only 12%, sometimes the differences are up to 33%. So it really depends on which setting you're using, which resolution and that kind of stuff. But over here, I'm just testing 2xFG. One thing I just wanted to mention is that the frame time graph when using the new DLSS frame generation, which is the flip chain model, the frame time graph is completely inaccurate and also the lows aren't captured correctly, right? None of the on-screen displays. I think FrameView might capture it correctly now. I'll have to test that, but MSI Afterburner cannot capture the lows and the frame time graph correctly when using frame generation or multi-frame generation with the new DLSS flip chain model. But here you can see we're getting around 250 frames per second on the 5070 Ti, 220 frames per second on the 5070, and 158 on the 5060 Ti. I think 1080p path tracing, it is doable on the 5060 Ti. Multi-frame generation actually feels very good in Doom for some reason. I've got the latency numbers here as well. Sometimes I did forget to put it on the 5070 Ti. I'm such an idiot. I know, I really do apologize. I'll get better at this, I promise. So as you can see, I don't have the latency numbers on the 5070 or the 5070 Ti, but not that the latency numbers here matter that much, but I do have it before I start enabling frame generation, just to give you an idea what the latency was before and after. But now here we are at 1440p Ultra Nightmare DLAA native, and now again the performance on the 5070 Ti is slightly ahead of the 5070, though it uses less power. It's so funny. Like I know I'm going to get a lot of comments on this and saying that my GPU is faulty. It's not faulty. It's just that the 5070 has a voltage limit of 1070 millivolts, and the 5070 Ti has a 995 millivolt hard cap, so the power draw is a lot less on the 5070 Ti. Alright, so Ultra Native DLAA, just wanted to give you an idea what performance is like without any path tracing. Enabling path tracing tanks the performance, obviously. So over here, the 5070 Ti can't even do 40 frames per second. The 5070 can't do 30 frames per second. And at the end of the run here, sorry, you'll see that the performance difference between the 5070 Ti and the 5070 is around 30%. So that's what you'd normally expect, right? Take power up has it at around 29% faster than the 5070. The 5060 Ti, I didn't talk about that because I don't think there's anything to talk about here. I tested it, all the settings the same, right, just to be able to put them side by side. I'm not advocating you to use these settings. It's just for people that are interested in them, right, and just to show you the differences between the settings. The 5060 Ti can do some path tracing at 1440p, and also one other thing is path tracing is set to max, right. There's not a big difference by turning down the path tracing settings. I recorded around between 6 to 8% difference by completely disabling all path tracing effects except for path trace lighting. So if you need that extra 6 to 10%, let's call it 10%, right? Just you can disable reflections and transparency effects, that kind of stuff, right? But I left it on during this video because the performance impact really wasn't that big. Now you can see that the 5070 Ti with DLSS Quality path tracing max averages around 60 frames per second, where the other two falls well short. But we will be testing some more aggressive upscaling a little bit later in the video, or next up anyway. So yeah, we have DLSS balance. And I just want to say one more thing. The results you see on the screen here is for the full benchmark run. I only included the last bit of the actual benchmark run as a video in this, but the metrics are recorded as of the start of the benchmark run, which I showed at the beginning of the video. So yeah, we have the 5070 Ti comfortably doing above 60 frames per second. Yeah, it's actually a pretty decent experience, and if you enable frame generation, yeah, it would be pretty good. The 5070 is just short of 60 frames per second, not the end of the world, although you will start noticing the latency, but you can see that there's a little bit of a latency difference between the 5070 and 5070 Ti, and then the 5060 Ti is hovering around 40-ish frames per second. Now if you enable 2x FG with DLSS balanced here, you can see we're getting around 120 frames per second with the 5070 Ti. It will drop below 100, so keep an eye on the latency number there. That's PC latency, it's not full end-to-end latency. Nvidia, if you're listening, if you can maybe send me an LDAT, I'd appreciate that. I don't expect one, but let's see what happens. So yeah, it's actually quite funny. Some places you'll see that the latency of the 5070 Ti is 40, then 50 on the 5070, and then 60 on the 5060, right? Anyway, so it might sound like a lot in Doom. 40 milliseconds to me feels perfectly fine. Other people will hate it. So before you write it off as, oh, it's 50 milliseconds PC latency, maybe try it first, because it really, MFG, frame generation and MFG in this game are both really good with consistent frame times, and it really feels very responsive, even at a lower base frame rate than what I would usually recommend. I'd usually recommend 70 plus frames per second before enabling frame generation. Here I can comfortably get by with around 50 frames per second before enabling frame generation, but that's subjective. That's just me, right? Other people will find it completely unplayable, so just test it, right? You might be surprised. But yeah, you can see that 5070 Ti is doing 200, the 5070 is doing 167, and the 5060 Ti is doing 120, but that is with 4x MFG. Alright, so 1440p Ultra Nightmare with DLSS performance, right? Now we're getting into more playable territory here with the 5060 Ti. I know it's still hovering the mid 40s. There are people that are perfectly fine playing at 40 frames per second, 30 frames per second. Like, once again, you're not going to get any judgment from me. PC is that kind of platform that caters to everybody, right? I personally prefer a higher refresh rate experience, and we're almost getting that. Like, we're getting an average of 80-70 on the 5070 Ti, and I'd call 90 plus a high refresh rate experience and a perfect place to start enabling frame generation. Although on the 5070 at 70 frames per second, it's also a pretty good starting point. Only downside is we are using DLSS performance, and some areas do start to look a little bit soft. Now, the game does use DLSS 4 transformer model. It does a very good job here, but it's just a little bit aggressive, right? We're doing 720p upscale to 1440p here, and you do notice it in certain areas. Mostly it's fine because the game is extremely fast paced, especially if you play on higher speed settings. I play on 150% speed. I don't notice any of these effects, right? I don't notice any blurriness. I don't notice the additional path trace lighting, that kind of stuff, right? So somebody like me, this update is probably, it's not aimed for me, right? Other people that like to enjoy the scenery, I think give path tracing a go and see how you'd like it. Now, last 1440p test here, just with the DLSS performance again and 4x MFGs. Wanted to show you what the performance is like, and the fake performance is like, as people would call it. Got 233 frames per second here, average on the 5070 Ti, almost 200 on the 5070, and around 150 on the 5060 Ti. It'll probably come down to around 140, right? But again, MFG gives a pretty decent experience to me. I kind of like it. I'm not the best first-person shooter player out there. I'm quite old, so my reactions aren't what they used to be. Like I just enjoy the game, and I enjoy the motion fluidity, right? So it looks very smooth, and that's what I enjoy about frame generation. Anyway, so here we have 4K, and for obvious reasons I did not include the 5060 Ti. Even though it has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, it can handle 4K when it comes to the VRAM buffer. It just cannot handle 4K when it comes to performance. Over here with the 4K Ultra Nightmare with DLSS, you can probably get away with DLSS performance without any path tracing on the 5060 Ti, and you'll get a good experience. But the video is aimed at path tracing, and as you'll see, 4K path tracing is that's a different beast altogether. So just wanted to give you an idea what the performance is like. You can see you're getting around 30 milliseconds PC latency on both, and both are above 60 frames per second here. Now, when we enable path tracing here, it's a different story, right? We are basically more than halving our frame rate. Although the 5070 took a bit of a bigger hit. Now just look at the frame time graph of the 5070. I'm 100% sure we're running out of VRAM here, because the performance is a lot lower than what I was expecting, right? And also the frame time graph is it's just all over the place. The PC latency is very high, and I do think we're running out of VRAM here. So if we start using a little bit more aggressive upscaling, and also, sorry, I needed to mention, I'm using 2048 for the texture setting, not 4096, so it's not the highest texture setting here. All the runs were done on 2048, so the texture pool size. Now, once we started aiming DLSS performance, I jumped directly to performance. I skipped balanced because none of the GPUs were giving us close to 60 frames per second, and even at DLSS performance, neither of these GPUs are getting us 60 frames per second. Now you can see the frame time graph of the 5070 is quite a bit better. The VRAM usage is about a gig lower, so I think we are maybe on the verge of running out of VRAM here. I've seen it happen where it reports like 10.1 gigabytes of VRAM used, but you'll start running out of VRAM. So it's not entirely 100% accurate. It's just there to give you an idea, right? And also there's two numbers to MSI Afterburner when it comes to VRAM usage. It's got VRAM allocated and VRAM used per process, and I'm using VRAM used per process. All right, so what happens if we use DLSS Ultra Performance? Once again, this is being upscaled from 720p up to 4K, and now the 5070 Ti gets us a consistent above 60 frames per second experience. It still looks okay, right? It's very aggressive upscaling, I know, and it's pretty much the same internal resolution as what we had with DLSS Performance at 1440p. That's just DLSS Ultra Performance upscaled to 4K, and it does look soft. Foliage looks soft, and the tree branches, leaves, etc. look a bit soft. But like, if you really want to use path tracing and you're driving a 4K monitor, aiming for 60 frames per second, you're going to have to use DLSS Ultra Performance on either of these GPUs, right? Now, if we just kick on frame generation, yes, this is going to be our second class test. Just once again, just wanted to see what the performance is like here. And actually on the 5070 Ti, hovering around 40 milliseconds for PC latency. That's actually pretty decent. Like it feels good to play. Now I don't just run these benchmarks and talk, right? That's what I'm doing right now, but I actually play the game for a long time with each of these GPUs to get an idea what the game feels like, so that I can report on how the game feels with frame generation, the latency numbers, that kind of stuff, right? Because you can look at the latency numbers and get an idea, but it's not always accurate because some games have higher inherent latency than others. So that's just what I wanted to say about that. All right, so the last test here is just with the MFG. This is actually 4x MFG, and PC latency does increase a little bit more than I'd want. So for me personally, I just stick with 2x frame generation. Again, that's subjective. You can try your own settings here. Again, MFG feels pretty good here in this game, so I'd say try it. If you do have the game and you've got a 50 series GPU, try MFG and see how it feels. Alright, that's going to be the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.